Hey, janitor. You lost, or you just looking to mop up $1 million floor? The laughter that followed was sharp and automatic. It came from the back of the boardroom, where two men in tailored gray suits leaned back in their leather chairs with smirks spreading like oil slicks. The room smelled of cologne and hourglass walls, chrome finishes, and the soft hum of air conditioning you could barely feel but always hear. At the far end of the room, Victor Dorsey stood still, gripping the edge of his faded maintenance cap. He didn't flinch. Not at the sneer, not at the tone. He'd heard worse. But what he was about to say had nothing to do with pride, and everything to do with truth. I said, Victor spoke, his voice low but firm, "Don't sign that contract." The room hushed. The tension clicked into place like a steel bolt sliding shut. Every eye turned toward him, from the legal counsel to the marketing VP, from the investor reps to the chairman himself, and finally, to the woman seated at the head of the long walnut table. Rose Monroe, CEO of Orion Capital, sat poised with a Mont Blanc pen in her hand, her expression unreadable. She blinked once, then slowly set the pen down beside the document, a $4.2 billion merger that had taken over 6 months to negotiate. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone neither warm nor cold. "Just curious." Victor swallowed, but didn't step back. His uniform was a little too big, a little too faded. His boots had seen better days. But his stance was solid. "This deal, it's not what it seems. You sign that, you're not just merging two companies, you're cutting thousands of lives off at the knees." James Bennett, the CFO, shot out of his chair. "This is outrageous. This man has no business in this room." "Let him speak," Rose said, not even looking at James. Victor exhaled. "I work the night shift, clean your floors, empty your trash. Sometimes, people throw away more than coffee cups and spreadsheets." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, shaking slightly. "Last week, someone tossed this. I wasn't snooping. I was doing my job, but I read enough." He unfolded the page. It was creased, slightly torn at the corner, but legible. "It's a summary sheet. Q4 job cuts, over 6,000 positions, hidden under operational realignment codes. You're targeting regional facilities, healthcare partners, educational contracts, even municipal support." There were murmurs, shuffles in leather seats. Rose leaned forward. James laughed. "And we're taking advice from janitors now? What's next? Lunch ladies on the board." Victor's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. "You don't have to take advice, just facts. My name's Victor Dorsey. I used to be on the other side of this table. I worked in corporate finance, structured deals, ran models, until I blew the whistle on a fraudulent IPO and got blackballed. Now I clean conference rooms like this one. But I can still read numbers." Rose studied him. "And what's your angle?" "No angle," he replied. "Just a daughter at home, Zoe. She's 12, type 1 diabetes. The local hospital network you're about to optimize is the one that provides her insulin through your foundation's assistance program. This merger goes through, that contract's gone. She's not alone. And..." The room fell into an uneasy silence. A junior executive near the window shifted in his seat. "Even if this is true, it's none of his..." "It's all of my business," Victor cut in, eyes sharp now. "You think because I push a mop, I don't see what's happening? Because I'm black, or poor, or silent, that I don't count? I live where your policies land. I feel every ripple of your restructuring. And I've watched too many people like you nod along while people like me disappear." "Hi." Rose's gaze didn't move. The room pulsed with an awkward weight, an invisible pressure like a storm about to break. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "Pause," Victor said. "Look deeper. This isn't just business. This is damage. People will lose their livelihoods. Kids won't get medicine. Teachers will be laid off. You sign that contract, you don't just wear the title of CEO. You carry the blood on the blade." James exploded. "Are we seriously entertaining this? He's a disgraced broker with a mop and a sob story. And yet, he brought more substance than you have in 3 months, Rose replied, her tone even deadly. Victor turned to go. His point had been made. Whether it would matter, that was beyond him. But he had tried. For Zoe. For the nurses he saw working double shifts. For the cafeteria workers. For himself. As he walked toward the door, he caught Rose's eye. There was something behind her expression. A memory maybe. or a flicker of understanding. "Victor Dorsey," she said aloud, almost to herself. "From Langford Capital, 2008? He nodded once. "That's right. Send everything you've got to my office. Every note, every detail." Victor stopped short. His heart thudded. "You mean it?" She gave the smallest of nods. "I do." Then to the room, she said, "This meeting is adjourned, effective immediately." End. Victor left the boardroom with his head high. Behind him, the silence was louder than anything else he'd heard that day. If you believe that courage can come from the most unexpected voices, leave a comment or share this story with someone who still believes in truth. Victor stepped out of the building into the fading light of late afternoon, his heart still thudding like a war drum in his chest. The Orion Capital headquarters stood tall behind him, a pillar of glass and steel on the edge of Baltimore's inner harbor, casting a long shadow across the pavement. The city buzzed around him, indifferent to what had just happened inside the building, a janitor interrupting a billion-dollar deal with nothing but a folded piece of paper and the weight of his own convictions. He walked briskly, head down, not out of shame but to keep the overwhelming emotions at bay. He didn't want to cry, not in public, not in front of the same street vendors who saw him every morning on his way to the bus stop. As he reached the corner of Pratt and Light Street, he stopped to breathe. He hadn't planned for what would come next. Maybe he'd be arrested, maybe Rose was bluffing, or maybe just maybe someone had finally listened. He pulled out his phone, a cheap prepaid model with cracks along the screen. There was a missed call from Mrs. Felder, Zoe's school nurse. His stomach tightened. He dialed quickly. "Mr. Dorsey." Her voice came through soft but direct. Zoe's insulin monitor was showing erratic readings. She said she felt dizzy during gym. "We stabilized her with juice, but you might want to come early." "I'm on my way," he said, his voice rasping, throat tight. "Thank you. Tell her I'm coming." He stuffed the phone back in his pocket and took the next bus west toward their neighborhood's small row houses, tucked between aging bodegas and boarded-up lots. His apartment was on the second floor above a shuttered laundromat, the windows too thin to block the cold in winter, too warped to catch a breeze in summer. But it was home. When he walked in, Zoe was already curled up on the couch, a knit blanket over her shoulders, her insulin monitor blinking green now. "Hey, Daddy," she said, voice weak but smiling. "You look like you wrestled a dragon." "Something like that," he said, crouching beside her and brushing a coil of hair from her forehead. "You feeling better?" "Mm-hmm. Miss Felder gave me orange juice. And I got out of math." She grinned mischievously. He laughed, that warm, tired kind of laugh only single fathers know. Then his expression turned serious. "Zoe, what would you think if I told you I did something big today?" "Like superhero big?" she asked. "Maybe not superhero, but brave." "Did you tell off your boss again?" "Worse," I interrupted a CEO. Her eyes widened. "You did not." "I did. In front of the whole boardroom. I told them not to go through with that big deal. The one that could have shut down your hospital." Zoe was quiet for a moment, processing. "Did they listen?" "I think one person did," he said. "And sometimes, that's enough." He didn't tell her about the sneers, the laughter, the thinly veiled racism that slipped from the mouths of men who saw his skin and his job before anything else. He didn't mention the fear in his bones when James Bennett stood, red with fury, or the security guard hovering by the glass doors. He just let Zoe hold his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused ones like a lifeline. After she drifted off to sleep, Victor sat by the window, the city lights flickering outside like restless fireflies. His mind drifted back to New York, back to 2008, Langford Capital. The day the phones went silent and the suits got nervous. Back when he wore Brooks Brothers and carried a leather briefcase. He remembered the whistleblower memo he sent, the one that revealed a pyramid of shell companies propping up a fake IPO. He remembered the meeting with legal, the smiles that turned to glares. Then, the quiet termination, the blacklisting, no offers, no callbacks, just silence. And then the eviction notice, the missed child support payments, the foreclosure. Every door slammed shut until the only one left was a mop closet. He had moved to Baltimore after Zoe's mother died in a car accident on I-95. He needed a city with hospitals, affordable rent, and no memories. Orion Capital's janitorial contract was his last shot at keeping Zoe insured. He knew every hallway of that building, every shortcut, every forgotten vent shaft. He also knew the rumors that Rose Monroe had clawed her way up from a family hardware store in Kentucky, that she put herself through Wharton on scholarships and late-night shifts at Waffle House. Maybe that was why she hadn't tossed him out like the others would have. Maybe she saw something she recognized. The next morning, Victor was up before dawn. He packed Zoe's lunch turkey sandwich, carrot sticks, and one of those marshmallow snack cakes she loved but rarely got. Then he printed everything he had, the memo, the draft projections, the suspicious clause entries. He took it to a small print shop and paid cash to scan and digitize everything to a USB drive. Before heading to Orion, he made a copy for safekeeping. That afternoon, he sat in the lobby for hours. Rose didn't come down, but her assistant finally appeared, a young man named Andre who spoke with polite urgency. "Miss Monroe said thank you," he said. "She's reviewing everything. You'll be contacted." Victor nodded. He wasn't sure if it was progress or a polite dismissal. Still, something had changed. That night, when he clocked in, no one looked him in the eye. The guards avoided him. The elevator technician nodded stiffly but said nothing. He was no longer invisible but not exactly welcome either. Near midnight, he paused by the executive lounge. The doors were open. Rose sat alone, reviewing documents under a warm desk lamp. She looked up and saw him. Didn't speak, just nodded, the smallest of acknowledgments. And for Victor, that was enough. Back home, he sat on the couch with Zoe sleeping on his shoulder and whispered to himself, "Maybe this time, they won't bury the truth." He looked out the window, where sirens hummed faintly in the distance, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight in his chest shift just slightly toward hope. 3 days passed with no word. Victor returned to his nightly routine, mop in hand, earbuds in one ear playing old Miles Davis tracks, the other ear tuned to the silence of empty hallways and quiet whispers of polished tile. Each night, he passed the same offices, the same marble counters, the same ignored bulletin boards, only now people noticed him, not with friendly greetings or nods, but with side eyes and hushed murmurs. A few turned their backs as he walked by. One even muttered, "Troublemaker," just loud enough for him to hear. It didn't surprise him. Speaking up always cost something, but it did wear on him. He kept his head down for Zoe's sake. That Friday night, just after midnight, he heard footsteps in the executive wing. That was odd. Most of the senior staff were long gone by 7 p.m. Curious but cautious, Victor paused by the end of the corridor and saw Rose Monroe standing in front of the long window, her silhouette outlined by city lights. Her back was to him. She was speaking in a low, clipped voice into her Bluetooth earpiece. He couldn't hear the full conversation, but fragments reached him. "I want a forensic audit on Bennett's team. Yes, internal. Quiet for now. No leaks." Victor ducked back into the hallway and exhaled slowly. So, she was taking action. Something stirred inside him, relief mixed with anxiety. If Bennett was being looked into, things might get dangerous. Not in the dramatic, movie kind of way, but in the subtle, career-ending kind. People like James didn't lose quietly. The next morning, while Victor made Zoe breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, a splash of orange juice, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Dorsey?" A female voice asked. "This is Agent Selena Ward with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We received a file package from an anonymous source, referencing your name and containing information relevant to a pending merger. Do you have time to talk?" Victor's hand tightened around the phone. "Yes, ma'am, I do." They met 2 hours later at a neutral site, a quiet office in a downtown federal building with bland walls and a smell like old coffee. Agent Ward was sharp, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair tied back and no-nonsense eyes. She wore a gray suit that looked more functional than fashionable and carried a legal pad instead of a laptop. "The documents you submitted," she said, "line up with patterns we've been following for a while. Shell transfers, contract rerouting, offshore incentives. If this merger goes through, millions in federal grant money would be diverted under the table through intermediary accounts. You uncovered more than you know." Victor leaned back in the hard plastic chair. "So you're going after Bennett?" "Eventually, but these cases take time. We're hoping to confirm some details. Reference internal communications. Maybe you could help us understand some of the context." Victor nodded. "Whatever you need." He spent the next hour walking Agent Ward through the documents, how he found them, what the codes meant, why certain contract terms were red flags. He surprised even himself with how easily it all came back. The old muscle memory of analysis, the jargon, the nuances. For a moment, he forgot he was just a janitor. When they wrapped up, Ward handed him her card. "If anything changes, if you feel unsafe, you call me. We take whistleblower retaliation seriously." He pocketed the card. "Thank you for believing me." "We don't believe," she said, cracking a faint smile. "We verify, but so far, you're checking out." Back home, Zoe was waiting with her sketchbook open. She'd drawn a picture of him, his janitor uniform, a mop in one hand, a cape on his back. "You're like Batman," she said proudly. "Only without the money." Victor laughed. "I think Batman had it easier." Over the next week, the atmosphere at Orion shifted further. The HR director suddenly took personal leave. Several emails mysteriously disappeared from the internal archive system. Victor noticed late-night lights in the legal office, and Rose's assistant Andre started walking with tighter shoulders and quicker steps. One evening, Rose called him into her office. She didn't offer him a seat, didn't need to. "I've confirmed what you said," she began. "I had our internal compliance team recheck the merger filings. The discrepancies you flagged, they're real, hidden, but real. And Bennett? He's not just aware, he's engineering it. We traced multiple dummy corporations back to entities he used before joining Orion." Victor's jaw clenched. "What now?" Rose tapped her desk slowly. "We wait. I've already contacted the SEC and DOJ. Quietly. I'm feeding them documentation one piece at a time to avoid alerting the board too soon." She hesitated, then said something unexpected. "You did the right thing. I'm not sure where this will end, but I won't let it be buried." Victor nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "I never thought I'd get a second chance to do the right thing." "Well," she said, "neither did I." As he turned to leave, she added, "You're not just a janitor anymore, Victor. Whether you like it or not, you're part of this now." The words lingered with him long after he clocked out. That night, while walking home, Victor noticed a black SUV parked near his building. No plates, tinted windows, the engine idling. A shadow sat behind the wheel, unmoving. He stopped short, watched, waited. But after 5 minutes, the car rolled away into the dark. The next morning, his mailbox was slightly ajar. Inside was a plain white envelope, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold black font: "Drop it, or lose everything." He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on the edge of Zoe's bed, watching her breathe. His mind raced, but one thought kept cutting through the fear like a blade. This was the cost of truth, and he'd paid it before. He'd pay it again, but not alone this time, not in silence, and not without a fight. Victor woke with a start, the image of the white envelope still etched behind his eyes like a brand. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, casting striped shadows across Zoe's sleeping face. He rubbed his temples, the tension in his neck like coiled wire. His instincts, sharpened by years of survival, whispered that the SUV, the note, the silence from upper management, none of it was coincidental. He made Zoe breakfast like always, but his hands moved slower. Every plate clinked louder. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like warning. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, pausing mid-bite. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," he admitted. "Got a lot on my mind. But I'm all right, baby. You just focus on school." After she left, backpack bouncing behind her, he pulled out the note again. The font was basic, the paper unremarkable. No fingerprints, no watermark. He stared at it, then shredded it into pieces and flushed them down the toilet. But the message had done its job. It was inside him now, a constant hum. That afternoon, he headed back downtown to meet with Agent Ward again. This time, she was waiting in a side room with a man she introduced as Agent Lowell from the FBI. Lowell was taller, darker suit, ex-military posture. "We've corroborated more of your data," Ward said, "and we've also discovered something deeper." Lowell took over. "James Bennett has a history of manipulating deals through backdoor routes. He launders risk through entities registered in Wyoming, then reinvests in Orion through third parties. It's a long game, built on optics and distractions. But he's about to win big if this merger closes." Victor said. Exactly, Ward nodded. And we believe he knows he's being watched. We think someone inside the company warned him. Victor leaned forward. You think he sent the note? Unclear. He's careful. Always uses intermediaries. But whoever sent that message wanted to scare you off. Victor let the silence sit for a moment. It didn't work. I'm in this to the end. Lowell exchanged a glance with Ward. We'll assign a field officer to check in periodically. In the meantime, keep your routines. Don't make yourself a bigger target. Victor returned to work that night with a strange calmness, like standing still during a storm, knowing it would break but unsure when. He avoided the executive floors and focused on his janitorial roots, but his eyes scanned everything. Unlocked doors, unfamiliar faces, shifts in security patrols. One night, as he emptied the trash in a finance analyst's office, he noticed a document face up in the recycling bin. Something about it felt familiar. It listed adjusted staff reallocation projections for the upcoming quarter. Curious, he took a quick photo on his phone before discarding it. Later, at home, he compared it to the original documents he had submitted to Rose. This version was clean, too clean. The language had been edited. The codes buried under innocuous terms like staff realignment efficiency. He looked up and whispered, "They're scrubbing the files." He contacted Andre the next morning, asking to meet off-site. They chose a diner on Charles Street, a quiet place filled with older regulars drinking black coffee and talking politics. Andre showed up wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy day, his nerves showing through every stiff movement. "You're putting me in a tough spot, man," he said as he sipped his water. "I've got a mortgage, a sister in chemo. If they find out I'm helping..." "You're not just helping me," Victor said, voice low. "You're helping protect the company's integrity. Rose believes in that. So should you." Andre hesitated, then slid a flash drive across the table. "These are internal memos between Bennett and a consultant named Elroy Canning. Look at the dates. The day before you spoke up, they were already prepping a backdated cover story." Victor took it, tucked it into his jacket. "You did the right thing." That night, he reviewed the files on an old laptop he kept offline. The emails were chilling, clinical, coded, confident. One even referred to Victor as the cleanup risk and proposed personnel reclassification pending board approval. They were trying to get him fired quietly, labeled as a security threat. He sent the files to Agent Ward with a message. "They're moving faster. If you wait, it'll be gone." Her reply came minutes later. "We've launched a formal inquiry. The DOJ is coming in." Meanwhile, Rose called an emergency board session. Victor wasn't invited, but he heard about it through the building grapevine. Voices had been raised. Bennett had stormed out. The next day, Rose found Victor in the staff cafeteria during his break. "They know I'm helping you," she said without preamble. "Bennett's trying to have me removed under breach of fiduciary duty. Can he? Not without a board vote. And not if I can prove he's compromised. But we're running out of time." Victor handed her the latest files. "Then we need to go public. Leak just enough to trigger questions. Let the court of public opinion push back." She hesitated. "If we do that, the company's stock will tank. If you don't, its soul already has." That night, a story broke online. A respected independent journalist posted an anonymous tip about shell firms linked to Orion's CFO. The next morning, financial news exploded with speculation. Orion's shares dropped 14%. The board called another emergency session. Victor was watching from the janitor's office when two men in suits escorted Bennett from the building. Word spread quickly. Some cheered, some stayed quiet, but the tide had shifted. That evening, Victor walked through the halls not as a ghost, but as someone seen. A few nodded in respect. One even whispered, "Thank you." He paused outside Rose's office. She looked up from her desk and smiled, tired but genuine. "You helped save this company," she said. "No," Victor replied. "I just reminded it of what it used to be." She stood. "The DOJ wants to meet you formally, and I've asked HR to reevaluate your role. It's time people knew who you really are." As he left, the sunset painted the glass walls with amber hues, and for the first time in a long time, Victor allowed himself to believe in justice, not perfect, not fast, but real. It started in silence. It took root in shadows. But now, it was stepping into the light. The aftermath of James Bennett's ousting sent shockwaves through Orion Capital. The stock dip began to level out within days, buoyed by whispers of internal reform and restored integrity. But beneath the surface, uncertainty simmered. Victor felt it everywhere in the cautious eyes of employees, the longer-than-usual meetings in conference rooms, the security guards who now nodded slightly when he passed. There was no announcement about him, no grand reveal. But people had heard, and people remembered. He moved through the building differently now, not because he tried to, but because the air around him had changed. Some admired, some resented. Others feared the disruption he represented. Rose, for her part, seemed busier than ever. Victor hadn't spoken to her in 3 days, but he could feel her presence moving across departments like a current. She was cleaning house, and everyone knew it. On Thursday morning, Victor received a formal email from HR subject line, "Reclassification of role and meeting request." Inside was an invitation to meet with the executive transition team. He stared at it for a long moment before clicking accept. That afternoon, he stood in a glass-walled office across from 2 suits and a woman named Marla, the director of HR. They offered him coffee, which he politely declined. "Miss Dorsey," Marla began, her tone warm but cautious, "we've reviewed your file, your recent actions, and your previous professional history. First, let me say, we're grateful. What you did took courage. I didn't do it for gratitude," Victor said. "I did it for the truth and for Zoe." The suits exchanged glances. Marla smiled. "Understood. Still, your initiative has opened conversations about what kind of company Orion wants to be moving forward. Which brings us to this." She slid a folder across the table. Victor opened it. Inside was a new contract, Project Integrity Advisor, temporary role, 6 months, renewable. Pay grade 4 times his current wage, access to oversight tools, full benefits. "You want me to stay," he said. "Not as a janitor. We want you to help build a new internal ethics framework," Marla explained. "Root out risks before they become crises. You've proven you have the instincts, and frankly, the employees trust you more than they trust any compliance officer right now." Victor closed the folder. "I'll think about it." On the way home, Zoe babbled excitedly about school. Her art teacher had nominated her for a local youth showcase. She said, "My drawing of you was full of soul," she grinned. Victor ruffled her hair. "She's got a good eye." That night, after she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table staring at the folder again. Project Integrity Advisor. It sounded like something out of a corporate fairy tale. He thought about the envelope, the SUV, the look on Bennett's face as he was led out, and then he thought about Rose. About the way she'd looked at him, not as a janitor, not even as a whistleblower, but as a partner, not equal in title, but in purpose. He picked up his phone and called her. "I'll do it," he said, "but on one condition." "Name it," she replied. "You don't bury what happened. You let the people see the cost, the danger, the victory." A pause, then, deal. The next week, Victor began his new role. His uniform changed, pressed shirts, Idaho badge, office keycard, but the habits stayed the same. He walked the floors, talked to the night crew, listened more than he spoke. He didn't forget where he came from, and neither did the people around him. The janitors now joked that he was their mole on the inside. Victor just smiled. 2 weeks in, Rose invited him to sit in on a closed-door session reviewing the previous quarter's financials. A woman named Linda from the board grilled Rose about internal stability and investor trust. Rose answered calmly, citing new transparency initiatives. "And who's overseeing that?" Linda asked. Rose gestured to Victor. "He is." Linda blinked. "The janitor?" Rose didn't flinch. "The man who saved us from a $4.2 billion fraud." A murmur ran through the room. Victor nodded once, not smugly, but firmly. "I know where to find the mess," he said. "I used to clean it." That line traveled faster than any press release. Within a day, employees across departments began approaching Victor not with complaints, but with stories. Stories of hidden inefficiencies, passive-aggressive sabotage, subtle discrimination. Some had been holding it in for years. Victor listened, and Rose made sure each claim was logged and followed. The culture began to shift, slowly, unevenly, but noticeably. Yet not everyone was pleased. One night, Victor found his locker vandalized. Spray paint scrawled across the door, "Rat." The message was loud, But the meaning wasn't new. People hated change, especially those who benefited from silence. He didn't report it. He didn't flinch. He wiped it off and went back to work. Meanwhile, Agent Ward contacted him with an update. "Bennett's legal team is scrambling," she said. "They're trying to settle quietly, but the DOJ wants to make an example." "He deserves worse," Victor said. "Maybe. But justice isn't vengeance. You taught me that." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, watching the city lights flicker against the evening sky. Later that week, Zoe came home from the art showcase carrying a blue ribbon. "I told them you were a hero," she said proudly. Victor knelt beside her, eyes glassy. "No, baby," he whispered. "Heroes wear capes. I wear work boots." She tilted her head. "So you're like a real-life superhero?" He smiled. "Something like that." At Orion, a plaque was quietly installed in the staff hallway. No grand ceremony, just a line of brass engraved with a quote, "Truth doesn't whisper, it waits until someone dares to speak." Beneath it a name, Victor Dorsey. He never mentioned it, never stopped to admire it, but he passed it every day, and every day he walked a little taller. 3 weeks into his new role, Victor found himself standing outside a conference room lined with glass, watching as a group of young analysts debated over compliance metrics and ethical investment frameworks. From janitor to advisor, he had witnessed the floor plans of power from both sides of the hallway. But what surprised him most wasn't the complexity of the systems, it was how simple the heart of corruption really was. Fear, pride, greed. That morning had started like any other, until Rose walked into his office holding a slim envelope. "From the Department of Justice," she said. "You're being formally acknowledged as a key informant in their case against Bennett." Victor took the envelope and weighed it in his hand. "Didn't do it for awards." "No, you didn't," she said. "That's why it matters." He nodded, but something about her tone felt off. She lingered, her eyes unreadable. "You okay?" he asked. "There's something I want to tell you," she said, "but I need you to promise to stay calm." Victor arched an eyebrow. "Rose." She sat down. 2 weeks ago, before Bennett was removed, he made a final transfer. Not money, not to an account, to a person, someone inside. Victor leaned in. "Go on." "There's a man named Calvin Ricks. Worked quietly in procurement. Had access to supply chain records, offshore audits. We believe Bennett gave him a data key. What was on it, we're not sure. But ever since then, Ricks hasn't reported to work. His emails bounce. His badge was deactivated. You think he's a leak? I think he's insurance. And I think he's just the beginning." Victor exhaled slowly. "All right, then we start digging." Rose reached into her folder and handed him a list of names, 10 employees, all flagged by internal behaviors, patterns, or affiliations with Bennett's now defunct network. "This is unofficial," she said. "But if anyone can get them talking, it's you." That afternoon, Victor began his rounds. But this time, he wasn't cleaning. He was observing, connecting dots. He started with Brenda, a mid-level accountant who always worked late and never smiled. He approached gently, asking questions not as an investigator, but as someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked. "You were here during the 2022 reorg," he said casually. "Bennett pushed that through, right?" Brenda glanced around. "Off the record?" "Always." She sighed. "It wasn't just the reorg. It was how he moved people quiet layoffs, repackaged as promotions. Half the new hires were shells. The other half, too scared to ask. You kept records? Of course not, she said, then looked away. But I remember things. Over the next several days, Victor compiled stories, fragments, little truths. A security guard who had seen strange after-hours meetings. A data analyst who noticed files disappearing from the internal server. A cafeteria worker who overheard Bennett arguing with someone about burying leverage. Each clue alone was meaningless. Together, they formed a mosaic of something larger. Then, one evening, Victor received an anonymous message through his work email. No subject, no name. Just a single line. You missed one. Look under Harlow's old desk. Richard Harlow, former board member, resigned quietly after the scandal broke. Victor waited until night, when most staff had gone. He took the service elevator to the executive floor, used his access badge, and entered Harlow's former office. It had been emptied weeks ago, but the desk remained. He ran his fingers underneath the drawers until he felt a notch. A hidden panel clicked. Inside was a slim USB drive wrapped in black tape. He didn't open it at work. He took it home, waited until Zoe was asleep, then booted up his offline laptop. The files were labeled by dates and initials. Most were innocuous financial logs, communications between departments. But then he saw the folder titled Umbra. Inside, voice recordings, transcriptions, and scanned documents showing a plan to privatize large sectors of Orion's assets through shell companies and collapse the public wing, shifting billions in liability. The plan had signatures James Bennett's, but also another name, Calvin Ricks, and to Victor's dismay, a third, M. Harlow, Rose's father. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Victor stared at the name, feeling the betrayal echo. Rose had never spoken of her father much, always referenced the board as them. But if she knew about this, no, he couldn't believe that. Not yet. The next day he met Rose at a coffee shop near the river. He slid the USB across the table. Harlow was in it. Your father. She froze, color drained from her face. You're sure? His name's all over it, and if he was involved, it explains why he resigned without protest. Probably cut a deal to walk away clean. She looked out the window, eyes glossed with something between fury and sorrow. He always said he built this company for the people. I wanted to believe it. Victor leaned forward. The question now is, what do you do with that truth? Rose clenched her jaw. We don't bury it, no matter the cost. That night, Victor drafted a report. Every finding, every statement, every whistleblower account. He submitted it to the board, the DOJ, and made one final copy printed, bound, sealed. He placed it in a fireproof envelope and gave it to Zoe with instructions. If anything ever happens to me, you give this to Agent Ward. She looked up at him, confused, but nodded. Is something bad going to happen? No, he said, kneeling. But when you stand for something, you plan for everything. A week later, the DOJ announced a second round of investigations. Harlow was subpoenaed. The media circled like vultures. And through it all, Victor kept working quiet, steady, resolute. He knew now that power wasn't just a title or a paycheck. It was a decision, and he had made his. Not just once, but every single day since the moment he said, "Don't sign that deal." The war wasn't over, but the silence was. The morning air felt heavier when Victor stepped into Orion Capital that Monday. The lobby, usually humming with quiet efficiency, was tense, as though people sensed the storm already swirling around them. He paused by the plaque bearing his name, tracing the brass letters with his thumb. Truth doesn't whisper, it waits. Outside the glass walls, Baltimore's skyline rose steady but indifferent. Inside, the ground shook. Rose met Victor in the lobby, her eyes rimmed with fatigue and purpose. They're organizing a hearing tomorrow, she said without preamble. Board-led, DOJ present, expect cameras. Victor nodded. We're ready. She looked at him, fragile strength in her posture. Orion's reputation is on the line, but so is my family legacy. My father's reputation is on the line. This might destroy half the board. Victor laid a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. She squeezed his hand before walking away. For a moment, he sensed the weight of her burden. That afternoon, he decided to visit Calvin Ricks's apartment. The FBI had not yet located him, but rumors placed him in Mount Vernon. He took a cab through Baltimore's old sections, where row houses looked like echoes of older lives. He found the building a red brick, 3-story, with ivy crawling over one side. He knocked gently, voice soft against the hush. Calvin Ricks? I'm Victor Dorsey. I need to talk. No answer. He pressed his ear to the door stillness. Then a shuffle, then the door swung open. Calvin's face was pale, haunted. He'd aged overnight. His eyes flickered between fear and relief. Victor sat at a small table littered with takeout wrappers. Calvin clasped his hands. They're coming, he whispered. They know I talked. They came to my door last night. Victor leaned forward. What did they want? Calvin shook his head, voice trembling. I refused. They showed me the files you found. They said if I didn't cooperate, my family would pay. His voice cracked. I'm scared for my daughter. Victor reached across, took his hand. You're doing the right thing. What do you have left? Calvin pulled a manila folder from under the table. Inside were scanned emails, internal calendar invites, meeting notes, evidence of hush-hush Umbra sessions. His voice was low. "This is all I could grab. I'm sorry it's not more." Victor shook his head. "It's enough. Thank you." He stood and placed a reassuring hand on Calvin's shoulder. "Stay safe. I'll make sure you're protected." Outside, the sun sank low, the day's warmth drifting away. Inside, Calvin exhaled, feeling some of the burden lift. Back at home, Zoe greeted him at the door with a stack of art supplies. "I made something for you," she said. He knelt, and she placed a drawing in his hand. Two figures, one in a janitor's uniform, the other in a business suit, holding hands under a golden sun. It brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you, baby." She smiled brightly. "You're my sunshine." That evening, he reviewed Calvin's files, piecing the timeline together. It lined up perfectly. Meetings, instructions, finance flows. Whoever planted those files at Harlow's desk wanted this unearthed. Victor thought about Rose, about her courage to stand up against her father's legacy. He knew they were inching into deep water, where reputations shattered and family names were dragged through the mud. The next morning, Orion buzzed with anticipation. News trucks lined the street. Journalists hovered near the entrance like vultures awaiting a carcass. Victor entered through the staff gate, wearing a dark suit, something serious, unassuming. Rose watched from across the lobby. She looked like she'd been through a hurricane, yet her eyes brightened as she caught his. "We go in together," she mouthed. He nodded. They walked side by side toward the boardroom. The conference room transformed into a hearing room, cameras positioned at each corner. Reporters whispered behind one-way glass. The board chair, a reserved man named Caldwell, called the meeting to order. Rose gave a brief opening statement, her voice steady despite the tension. "Investigation has uncovered wrongdoing at the highest levels. We are committed to transparency and accountability." Cameras flashed. Caldwell then invited Victor to speak as a witness and ethics advisor. Victor rose slowly, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes, the hum of camera lenses. He cleared his throat. "My name is Victor Dorsey. 2 months ago, I spoke up because I believed in truth and because I believed in our people. I uncovered evidence of a scheme, codenamed Umbra, executed by Mr. Bennett and facilitated by others, including board members." His voice held calm conviction as he laid out the timeline, referenced the files Calvin provided, and described the layers of fraud. Each piece he presented echoed like a drumbeat driving toward accountability. At one point, Caldwell interrupted, voice tense. "You implicate Richard Harlow, former board member and father of the current CEO?" Victor met Caldwell's gaze. "I do. The evidence includes communications bearing his signature. He orchestrated a plan to privatize liability, siphon assets, and dismantle Orion's public responsibilities. I submitted this to the DOJ, the board, and to Miss Monroe." A hush fell. Rose swallowed hard, emotion flickering in her eyes. After Victor sat, the hearing moved into questioning. The DOJ representative, a serious woman with a clipped accent, asked about threats Victor had received. He nodded and described the envelope, the SUV, the constant eyes. When asked if he feared for Zoe's safety, he paused, looked toward Rose, who sat stone-faced but unwavering, and replied, "Yes, I feared, but fear is why truth matters." A murmur filled the room. Later, Rose took the stand, her composure regal yet human. She defended Victor's integrity. She confirmed the authenticity of the documents. She announced her intention to seek legal action against Harlow, Bennett, and any accomplices. Her voice cracked slightly over Harlow's name. He mentioned her mother in a private conversation afterward. The cameras picked it up. When the hearing adjourned, murmurs of shock and respect rippled through the room. Outside, reporters surrounded Victor and Rose. Rose offered brief remarks about transparency and accountability. Victor looked tired but resolute. A reporter asked, "What drives you to stay in this fight?" He looked at Rose, then at Zoe drawing in the lobby, and said, "I fight for my daughter, for every person who feels invisible, because sometimes the smallest voice can change the world." That evening, back in his apartment, Victor collapsed onto the couch. Zoe climbed beside him and wrapped him in a tight hug. "You were brave," she said softly. "I know." He kissed her forehead. I did it for you." He realized that every sleepless night, every risk, every sacrifice had led to this. Justice wasn't perfect, but it had a pulse again. In the days that followed, the board moved to publicly indict the involved parties. Skyrocketing headlines called it "Salvaging the Soul of Orion Capital." Bennett and Harlow faced criminal charges. Rose retained her position and pledged reforms. Victor's role was formalized. He would head an independent ethics office, SBC certifications, compliance teams, corporate training, all under his guidance. Baltimore breathed a little easier. The community healthcare network retained funding. Zoe's school remained open. Pensioners, cafeteria workers, night shift staff, they learned that one man's voice had protected their livelihoods. Victor returned to his routine the next morning, stepping past that plaque in the lobby. It felt like stepping back into a life where everything changed. But when someone nodded, when a guard tipped his hat, or when Rose paused their eye contact, the silent affirmation was enough. From janitor to advisor to protector of truth, his journey continued. But this time, he knew that the fight was not against shadowy plans or faceless corporations. It was for accountability, for dignity, for the promise that no one, regardless of their uniform, remained unseen. The following weeks at Orion Capital were marked not by silence but by the buzz of change. For the first time in decades, staff meetings were no longer top-down lectures but open forums. Rose had commissioned a restructuring of the executive hierarchy, flattening levels that had once towered over junior staff. But beneath the progress, Victor sensed another current, one slower, quieter, more dangerous. As he moved through hallways that once shunned his presence, he noticed glances that lingered too long, whispers that died mid-sentence. A new unease was blooming. It wasn't resistance to justice. It was fear of what still remained in the dark. Late one evening, Victor was reviewing ethics training proposals when an anonymous envelope slid under his office door. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed a man in a trench coat speaking with Harlow in a parking garage dated 3 months before Harlow resigned. Scrawled in red ink across the bottom were the words, "You didn't finish the job." Victor stared at the photo, his breath caught. He scanned the man in the trench coat. Something familiar, tall, angular jaw, confident stance. Then it clicked. Gerald Langston, former COO, supposedly retired. Langston had been Bennett's right hand for over a decade, yet escaped scrutiny in the initial fallout. Victor hadn't seen his name in any files. No subpoenas, no mentions. The next morning, Victor approached Rose with the photo. "Langston was never investigated," he said quietly. Rose stared at the image, her lips tightening. He vanished right before the audits began. Officially moved to Charleston, but no forwarding address. Victor nodded. "He's the last ghost." Rose leaned back, eyes distant. If he's still pulling strings, he may be propping up new deals under different names. We need to know. That afternoon, Victor initiated a deep dive review into Orion's current vendor contracts. Nothing overt at first, but buried beneath subcontractor trails and shell companies, a name appeared repeatedly: Marble Anchor LLC, registered offshore, high-value transactions, no public face. Working alongside an IT specialist named Miles, an older man who once supervised janitorial scheduling, Victor mapped the data. Miles chuckled. "You know, back when I scheduled your floor shifts, I always said you cleaned better than the execs thought." Victor smiled. "Now I'm cleaning the corruption instead." As they traced the contracts, one led them to a holding company that listed Gerald Langston as an inactive board consultant. Rose authorized a request to the DOJ for a secondary investigation. The next step was more personal. Victor booked a flight to Charleston. Miles offered to come, but Victor declined. "This part I do alone," he said. Zoe hugged him goodbye with a whispered, "Be safe, Daddy," and placed her favorite marble in his palm. For luck, Charleston met him with humidity and slow southern drawls. After a day of inquiries and subtle questions at local businesses, Victor found Langston's address, a sprawling estate behind wrought iron gates. He waited until dusk, then walked the perimeter until he found an opening in the fence. Inside, lights were off. The air was thick with magnolia and mistrust. He approached a side door, knocked once, then twice. A shadow moved behind the glass. The door cracked open. Langston's voice was like gravel. "You're either a ghost or an idiot. Call me a janitor with questions. Victor replied. Langston stepped aside slowly. Come in, might as well finish what you started. The house smelled of old scotch and older secrets. Langston poured a drink but didn't offer one. I knew Bennett was reckless, but you really lit the match. Victor stood firm. You funded Marble Anchor. You kept the fraud going after Bennett fell. Langston raised an eyebrow. What's your angle? Expose me? Blackmail? Truth, Victor said simply. That's all I ever wanted. Langston sipped his drink. Truth is a luxury. People don't want it. They want order, comfort, a story to believe in. Even if it's built on broken backs? Especially then. The room fell silent. Victor placed the Polaroid on the table. This ends with you testifying. Clean break. No more shadows. Langston laughed bitterly. You think I'd walk into a courtroom? I'd be dead before the oath. Victor leaned in. Then write it down. Give me the documents. Let me finish this. Langston stared at him. For a moment, the old COO looked tired, old, not wicked, just worn out from lying. He walked to a cabinet and retrieved a thick envelope. This has everything. Names, routes, transfers. I kept it in case someone came knocking. Victor took it, nodded once. You did the right thing. Finally. Langston smirked. Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of hiding. Victor left quietly, heart pounding, envelope tucked close to his chest. The flight home was sleepless. At dawn, he met Rose outside Orion HQ. The city was waking up. Workers filed into nearby offices, coffee in hand. He handed her the envelope. Langston gave us the last piece. Rose's hands trembled as she opened it. This is enough to shut it all down, she said. Every shell company, every account, it's over. Victor didn't smile. Then make it count. That afternoon, Rose made a live statement. Cameras streamed from the rooftop terrace. She held up the envelope and declared, What began as a whisper of wrongdoing has become a thunderclap. Orion Capital will no longer be a playground for greed. We choose integrity. We choose people. Applause rippled through the gathered employees. Some wept, others clapped with fists clenched in relief. Zoe watched from home, face aglow as her father appeared beside Rose. That's my daddy, she whispered, pressing her marble into her palm. The DOJ announced new indictments that week. Langston entered protective custody. The Senate proposed new legislation based on Orion's case, a corporate ethics reform bill dubbed the Dorsey Directive. Victor was offered a permanent federal advisory role. He declined. I've got work to do here, he said, returning to Orion the next morning in his plain gray suit, lunch packed by Zoe, shoes shined like always. In a world of corner offices and cutthroat deals, he remained steady, more guardian than executive. And as he walked past the marble columns of the lobby, every step echoed with the weight of justice earned. The air in Orion Capital had become electrified, a buzz that crackled louder than the city outside. Victor arrived early as usual and paused at the lobby plaque. Truth doesn't whisper, it waits. He traced the brass letters with his thumb before heading to his office where Rose was already waiting, her face lit by morning sun and determination. They're scheduled to file today, she said softly, handing him a printout from the DOJ site. Bennett, Harlow, Langston plead not guilty. They're demanding full hearings. It could drag on for months. Victor scanned the document. And meanwhile, people are waiting for transparency. She nodded. Our reform plan goes live next week. Compliance dashboard, whistleblower hotline, independent oversight committee. We're being watched, but we're ready. A tension hovered between them, the weight of progress and the shadow of backlash. Victor knew that as visible as they'd become, so too had the forces opposed to change. He glanced out the glass walls at busy employees. Some gathered in clusters, whispering. Banners went up near the entrance, words like integrity, accountability, unity, printed in blue and gold. They were symbolic, but needed. Victor's first public task came that afternoon, a live Q&A with employees held in the staff auditorium. Chairs were filled with guarded faces, janitors, analysts, managers, interns, some still wary. Rose opened with a heartfelt address. We've faced betrayal, we've felt the cost, but now we choose a new course, one based on fairness, honesty, respect. Applause followed, small at first, then louder. She motioned to Victor. And here is the man who reminded us why we began. End of section. Victor rose, nerves tucked under focus. I stand here not because I broke a silence, but because I believed we could do better. Now, it's time to build that better together. Hands raised. Questions came. Will our jobs be safe? How do we report concerns? Can we trust security not to spy on workers? He answered each. Job safety through contract clauses, hotline monitored by third party, zero tolerance for surveillance without consent. As he spoke, cameras captured his sincerity. Senior staff watched through one-way glass. Afterward, small groups approached him not to thank him, but to tell stories. The terrified receptionist held back due to manager threats, a data clerk who discovered expense padding but didn't know where to go, a cafeteria cook worried about his son's health care. Victor listened and promised, "No more fear. This hotline is a shield." Each promise felt like a stone laid in a foundation. Back in his office, he found Andre waiting. "Just wanted to say thanks," the assistant said quietly. "You gave me back my voice." Victor watched as the tension in Andre's shoulders eased. Good, that's what this is about. But change always breeds pushback. That evening, Victor received another anonymous envelope inside. 2 photos of Zoe, taken outside her school. No note. He felt ice in his veins. Rose noticed it too, standing at the door. "I'll handle this," she said softly. "Report to me if anything. We'll involve the FBI." Victor nodded. "She's my priority." Rose touched his arm gently. "She will be." The next morning, a press release went out. Rose and Victor would host a City Hall-style town meeting in Baltimore next week open to the public. Employees, media, community leaders. Word spread fast. Local advocates for corporate accountability offered to speak. Nonprofits for youth and healthcare applied for partnerships with Orion's reform wing. Victor felt a beam of pride. This wasn't just corporate rebirth. It was community rebirth. Still, resistance lurked. During a late-night check, Victor overheard finance staff discussing new pressure from unseen investors unhappy with the PR fallout. "They want results," one whisper said. "We can't keep bleeding money on transparency." Victor dug deeper and found that a proxy firm with major shares was lobbying for Rose to be temporarily suspended until due diligence is complete. He ran straight to Rose's office. "This is real," he said. "We need to prepare." She exhaled, her composure fracturing for a moment. "Let them play politics. We'll show them results." That weekend, Victor worked with Miles and the IT team to launch the first internal dashboard, dozens of past reports logged, every action traceable. Rose announced external auditing partners, all ready for the town hall. Tuesday evening, the auditorium overflowed employees, investors, media, community leaders, even Zoe with a school friend. Rose and Victor took the stage. Cameras rolled. The city meeting began, moderated by a local pastor. Questions ranged from, "How will you protect minority workers?" to, "What penalties for violations?" Victor answered every question, citing policies and procedures. Rose spoke of values and vision. Together they projected steadiness and empathy. 20 minutes in, a loud voice interrupted from the back. A man in an expensive suit rose. "I've invested in Orion for years," he said. "I want to know why we sacrifice profit for moral theater. Who's covering my losses?" Murmurs rippled. Victor approached him. "We're not sacrificing profit. We're safeguarding trust. And trust lasts longer than any quarterly return." The investor looked unconvinced. "We need proof," Rose responded calmly. "Our first transparency report will be released next month, reconciling all costs tied to the reform. If trust is the only currency, then we'd better be good at counting it." The room stunned into silence, then applause. Victor exhaled. They'd faced the skepticism head-on. Afterwards, the investor came forward not with hostility this time, but curiosity. Rose assured him that profit and integrity weren't mutually exclusive. Victor felt a surge. They'd turned resistance into dialogue. That night, he took Zoe for ice cream at the harbor. She pointed at the glow of the Orion Tower. "That's where you work your magic?" she asked. He laughed. "Something like that." She scooped fur chocolate into a waffle cone. "You're like a superhero." He ruffled her hair. "Because you gave me wings." In the days that followed, the dashboard went live. The hotline rang. Anonymous submissions, both petty and critical, started. Victor vetted them personally, forwarding them to the appropriate teams. He faced late nights but felt energized. Rose changed leadership meetings. No more closed-door decisions, just updates, oversight, accountability. The board backed her. By week's end, a small group of community leaders and employees introduced a volunteer initiative, Partners in Integrity, matching Orion teams with local nonprofits. Victor agreed to lead pilot projects. The buzz shifted, from scandal to action, from crisis to collaboration. Yet beneath the momentum, the envelope with Zoe's photos remained heavier than any press release. Victor filed a report with the FBI. Intel arrived quietly. Surveillance had been shut off as quickly as it turned on. The threat had been real, but deterrence had worked. He returned to work the next day feeling both wary and resolute. Progress always came with shadows. What mattered was the light you turned on. When he passed the lobby plaque, his reflection merged with visitors, employees, partners, community advocates. Not just a janitor turned advisor, but a symbol. He touched the brass letters gently, breath steady. This was the fight for dignity, for trust, for people who believed their voices mattered. And as he walked on, shoulders straight, he carried with him the promise that true change begins in the shadows, but only shines when courage carries it into the light. Winter rolled into Baltimore with a quiet force. The skyline, usually bright and angular, looked softer under the December gray. Orion Capitol glowed in the haze like a fortress of resolve, its newly installed banners fluttering in the cold wind, each etched with phrases like, "Truth has a home here and integrity is not optional." But beneath the polished floors and optimistic slogans, Victor felt a tremor he couldn't ignore. The threat wasn't over. It had only gone deeper. The day started like any other. Victor was sipping his black coffee when a buzz from his desk notified him of an anonymous report flagged by the compliance dashboard. He opened it. The words made his stomach tighten. "I have proof the reform team is being infiltrated. Someone inside is feeding information to the proxy investors. You're not safe. No signature, no attachments. Just coordinates an internal file directory on the server." He clicked the link. It opened a folder titled Redwood. Inside, dozens of files, financial records, chat logs, even meeting transcripts. One stood out, a transcript of a private conversation between Rose and a board member discussing Langston's cooperation. The date matched a day only a handful of people knew about. Someone on the reform team had leaked it. Victor immediately called Rose into his office. "We have a mole. Look at this." She skimmed the files, her face set in stone. "This is internal. No one from outside could have pulled this." Victor exhaled, nodding. "I want to trace it, but quietly. If we're being watched from inside, we need to be smarter than ever." Rose agreed. "Start with people who had access to Langston's timeline. And Victor, be careful. If they're this close, they're desperate." They contacted Miles, who brought in a trusted former Orion cybersecurity manager, now freelancing for the DOJ. Within hours, they had a suspect pool of 6. One name made Victor's heart drop: Karen Liu. She had been a mid-level manager in HR for over a decade. Quiet, reliable, never questioned authority. She'd also been tasked with overseeing parts of the reform policy rollout. Victor felt betrayed. She'd been at the town hall. She'd cheered. He remembered her helping Andre when he fainted last month during a fire drill. It didn't add up. That evening, he confronted her calmly, privately. "Karen, we have reason to believe there's been a leak, and your access shows some overlap." She blinked, eyes wide. I don't know what you mean." He pushed gently. "The Redwood folder. Someone planted internal conversations. Ones you had clearance to." Her eyes welled. "Victor, I swear I didn't. I only shared one file with an external auditor, but I trusted him. He said it was for oversight, to protect the company." "Who was he?" "He said his name was Randall Moss. Wore a badge like the DOJ, but I never checked it closely. He called himself a contracted liaison." Victor's heart dropped. There was no Randall Moss on the official DOJ list. Someone had impersonated a federal agent, manipulated Karen, and walked out with sensitive files. Rose was notified. They went into lockdown. External correspondence was frozen. DOJ was alerted to the impersonation. Victor worked around the clock with Miles and the cyber team to secure every digital channel. "We have to assume everything's compromised," Miles said. "Not just data, trust." That night, Victor couldn't sleep. He watched Zoe curled up on the couch, her breath soft, a sketch pad still open in her lap. She'd drawn him again. But this time, not in a janitor's uniform. She'd drawn him standing on a stage, surrounded by people clapping. The caption read, "My hero not because he cleans, but because he sees." He felt his throat tighten. He whispered a silent promise, "They won't take this from us." Back at Orion, new layers of surveillance went up. Every department reviewed its access. But the breach had already seeded doubt. Some staff whispered in corridors again. "Are we really safe? What if this is all a show?" Even Andre pulled Victor aside. "People want to believe, Vic, but now they're scared all over again." Victor didn't sugarcoat it. "We are under attack, yes, but that means what we're doing matters." 3 days later, DOJ sent word. The man impersonating Randall Moss was identified. Robert Keel, a known private operative hired in the past by proxy firms to disrupt labor unions and activist boards. He had gone underground, but his emails were found. Among them, one addressed to an unknown recipient. "Operation Marble Anchor has one last chance. If Victor Dorsey doesn't fall, we'll make the public lose faith in him instead." It wasn't about data anymore. It was about discrediting Victor himself. That same afternoon, a smear article appeared online, published by a blog notorious for corporate propaganda. It accused Victor of misusing his janitorial access years ago to eavesdrop on executives. "He climbed the ranks through deceit," it read. "Now he hides behind integrity while silencing real workers." The article went viral. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Supporters defended him. Critics latched on. Victor met Rose in the crisis room. "They're playing dirty," he said. Rose nodded grimly. "It's time we go public with our side. All of it. Not just the successes, the fears, too." The next morning, Victor stood before the media, not as a symbol, but as a man. "Yes, I was a janitor. Yes, I listened when no one saw me, but not to exploit, to understand. Because when systems fail, someone has to pay attention. I paid attention." His voice steadied. "And now, I'm not cleaning floors, I'm cleaning house." He didn't smile. He didn't soften the edges. He told the truth. That afternoon, dozens of former Orion employees sent in letters of support. Local radio shows picked up the story. A teacher from Zoe's school wrote to the Baltimore Sun, "This man isn't a threat to order, he's proof that change is possible." Victor knew the worst wasn't over, but the tide had shifted again. When truth is attacked, it either shatters or sharpens. And Victor, forged in obscurity, shone sharper than ever. That night, Zoe looked up from her homework. "Did they stop being mean?" "Some did," Victor said. "Some didn't." She smiled. "But you're still standing." He kissed her forehead. "That's what matters." And outside, beneath the cold Baltimore sky, Orion's lights remained steadfast, not in defiance, but in hope. Victor sat alone in the stillness of the Orion boardroom, the weight of the last few weeks pressing against his chest like a vice. He glanced at the empty chairs around him, once symbols of power, now stripped of pretense. They were just chairs, and he was just a man who'd tried to clean a mess that ran deeper than any floor. Across the polished table, a folder lay open. It contained the full DOJ report, stamped and verified. Inside were damning conclusions, evidence of financial manipulation by board members, ghost partnerships with shell companies overseas, and most critically, an orchestrated campaign to discredit the reform initiative by undermining Victor himself. The report named names Bennett, Langston, Harlow, and 2 shadow shareholders whose identities were finally unmasked. Among them, Malcolm Whitaker, a billionaire investor who'd remained silent for years, hiding behind a web of proxy votes and private holdings. Whitaker's involvement tied back to multiple similar disruptions in other companies undergoing ethical reforms. Orion had been a project. Victor had been a target. "They thought this would fold me," Victor whispered to himself, running a finger along the edge of the report. But it didn't, because something stronger than fear had been built. Rose entered the room, her expression tight, phone in hand. "The media's buzzing," she said. "SEC just made a statement confirming arrests. Keel's been picked up in Atlanta, tried to board a plane to Zurich. Victor raised his eyebrows. That fast? She nodded. Guess Justice occasionally remembers how to sprint. She sat beside him. There's one more thing. We got a subpoena. Victor stiffened. For what? For you. They want you to testify before Congress next month about whistleblower protection and corporate retaliation. He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the gravity. Me? Yes, you. They said you're the first janitor turned executive advisor with a verified internal whistle record. Victor chuckled dryly. That's quite the LinkedIn headline. Outside, Baltimore was waking up. It was a Monday. Cold, but bright. The city didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. Not just in Orion, but in how stories like Victor's were perceived. Not as anomalies, but as proof. Andre burst into the room, breathless. You guys need to see this. He turned on the large screen. A live feed played from a news channel. On the steps of Orion's entrance, dozens of employees, current and former, had gathered. Some held signs. Real change starts inside. Others simply stood with hands over hearts. Andre looked back at Victor. They came for you. Rose reached over and squeezed Victor's hand. Actually, they came because of you. The rest of the day was a blur. The HR team finalized a new clause in all contracts, the Dorsey provision, ensuring any staff who flagged internal ethical concerns would receive immediate third-party legal protection. Victor hated the name, but appreciated the gesture. Emails poured in, CEOs from smaller firms asking for consultation, journalists requesting interviews, law professors asking for permission to study the reform model for upcoming ethics textbooks. Victor answered none of them, not yet. Not until Zoe was picked up from school and had eaten her macaroni and cheese at the kitchen table like any other normal Tuesday. That night, he sat with her on the couch. The news played in the background. Zoe leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, she said, you don't look like the guys on the news who wear ties and talk fast, but you sound better. He laughed. That's because I still remember how to mop a hallway without slipping. She giggled, then turned serious. Are you scared to go talk to all those people in Congress? A little, he admitted, but not scared enough to stay quiet. She thought for a moment. Then I'll come with you. He smiled. Deal, but only if you wear your lucky sneakers. Yeah. The week leading up to the congressional hearing moved swiftly. Rose prepared him meticulously. Don't over-explain. Just tell them what you saw, what you heard, what you lived. Victor practiced, not to perfect his answers, but to find his own clarity. He didn't need to sound like an executive. He needed to sound like a man who paid attention when others didn't. The day of the hearing, Victor stood before a panel of senators, cameras blinking, reporters scribbling. He wore a charcoal suit borrowed from a friend and a pair of polished shoes Zoe had insisted he wear. The lead senator, a woman in her 60s with a steely gaze, opened the session. Mr. Dorsey, thank you for being here. He nodded. Thank you for listening. For the next hour, he answered questions. Some were political theater, others were genuine. But when he spoke about fear, the fear of speaking up, of losing a job, of being invisible, every head turned. What gave you the courage? One senator asked. Victor paused. Honestly, my daughter, and a mop. Confused murmurs rose. He continued. You spend enough nights cleaning up after powerful people, you learn to see what they don't, and you start to believe that maybe your view matters, because it's closer to the floor, closer to the truth. After the hearing, he stepped outside into a sea of flashing cameras and questions. He said nothing more, just smiled, waved, and walked to the car where Zoe waited, her sneakers on the dash. Did they clap? She asked. Some did, he said, but the real applause came from the truth. Back at Orion, the team finalized a series of public commitments funding education grants for disadvantaged youth, supporting community cleanup projects, and launching an internship program specifically for children of service workers. Victor would oversee it personally. On the first day of the program, he stood at the entrance as a group of high schoolers entered, wide-eyed and unsure. One of them, a girl with bright glasses, asked, "Are you the CEO?" Victor grinned. "Nope, but I help make sure this place listens to people like you." She smiled back. "That's better." And so, the janitor who once walked through Orion's halls unseen now walked them as a bridge between what was and what could be. Not perfect, not invincible, but unbroken. Baltimore moved on. Seasons changed. News cycles rotated. But in the memory of those who had watched, who had dared to hope, the story of Victor Dorsey remained. Not because he was loud, but because he was steady. Not because he had power, but because he gave it back. That night, as the moon rose over the harbor, Victor stood on the rooftop of Orion, wind brushing against his face. He looked out over the city he loved, the company he helped heal, and the daughter who gave him strength. And quietly, to no one in particular, he whispered, "We're not done, not by a long shot." Victor stood in the grand lobby of Orion Capitol on a crisp spring morning, the brass plaque behind him gleaming beneath soft lighting. Truth doesn't whisper, it waits. He read the words slowly, their resonance now part of him. Behind him, Rose finished her speech to a gathering of local leaders, employees, and press. Orion's latest initiative, Integrity in Action, would funnel resources not just into corporate responsibility, but into neighborhoods, mentorship programs, healthcare outreach, and educational scholarships. The moment felt cinematic, but as he stepped forward for photos and handshakes, Victor kept his heart steady. This wasn't about acclaim, it was about accountability sustained over years, not just headlines. Zoe tugged at his sleeve, holding a framed drawing. It was the same image she'd made months ago, him in a suit next to Rose, standing beneath a sun of golden lines. Underneath, she'd added new figures, children holding hands, a local clinic, a school building, and a city skyline. "Daddy, it's your story," she whispered. He hugged her tightly. "It's our story, Zoe." "Oh." Over the next hours, Orchard staff began moving supplies, destined for local schools. Rose tapped his shoulder. "Want to lead the distribution?" He nodded, and together they walked out into the daylight, passing through employees lined up like bookends along the entrance, cheering. Victor paused, meeting their eyes. Many looked back with gratitude, some with tears. Even those who had once whispered doubts offered small nods. He stepped off the marble floor onto the sidewalk, where distribution boxes were being unloaded from a truck. As he lifted the first crate filled with textbooks and tablets, he thought of where he'd come from. A mop closet, a night shift, a threat-ridden hallway. And now this. Shelves of hope headed to neighborhoods that had nothing to do with Orion's bottom line, but everything to him. The next day, a ceremony took place in the city's community center. Local officials, educators, and families gathered. Victor stood at a podium, not as an executive, but as a community advocate. He spoke of accountability, compassion, and the power of seeing others. "We're not here because Orion changed just one man. We're here because one man reminded a company and a city that every voice matters." The applause that followed shook the room, not for his title, but for his message. Back at Orion, things were changing in ways that only showed over time. HR introduced regular ethics training with real case studies from the Marble Anchor scandal, featuring anonymous staff testimonies. The compliance dashboard became a public PDF available to all employees. The hotline was run by an independent third party, tallying hundreds of calls with resolutions outcomes posted monthly. More than that, junior staff were invited to sit in on executive planning sessions, offering perspectives on projects before decisions were made. The guards still nodded at Victor. They greeted him now, sometimes asking about Zoe or thanking him for helping move a crisis before it moved them. Less visible, but no less vital, was Mars Education, the nonprofit born from an Orion seed fund. Victor worked with local teachers to design after-school programs teaching coding, financial literacy, and civic engagement. He showed up occasionally, wearing a sweater and jeans, teaching a 30-minute session on how to spot shady contracts, wordplay simplified but vivid enough for teens. He watched a girl draw a chart connecting shell companies to neighborhood clinics. She raised her hand. "So, if I speak up, I can stop something." He smiled. "Yes, that's exactly what you can do." Internally, Rose finalized another layer of reform. She invited Victor to co-chair a permanent Ethics and Equity Committee, an institutional body that would oversee CEO decisions with staff representation. It was unprecedented at Orion. They drafted bylaws, membership guidelines, and launched applications across departments. They set a panel to oversee any future mergers. If the board tried to steamroll a deal again, the committee had veto power. Victor's role wasn't symbolic. He'd cast the first vote when the committee stepped in to block a minor acquisition deemed risky by their lens. The board accepted, and Orion's stock barely wavered. One afternoon, Victor found himself in Rose's office, windows open, early summer breeze rustling papers. She offered him coffee. They sat in quiet camaraderie. "We've come a long way," she said. He nodded. "Not far enough," he replied gently, "but farther than any of us expected." She looked at him, gratitude in her eyes. "Would you ever leave? You could go anywhere." He paused, thinking of Zoe and the apartments, the schools, the neighbors. "This is my home," he said. "I'll stay as long as I'm useful." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "You're more useful than you know." That evening, Victor walked home with Zoe, the harbor lights blooming in pink and gold behind them. She chattered about summer camp and her new birdhouse project. He listened, content in the simple joy. Later, tucking her into bed, she whispered, "I want to be brave like you." He kissed her forehead. "You already are." In the weeks that followed, Orion fielded requests to share their model with other companies. Boardroom tours became inverted. Victor led groups, showing them where the plaque stood, where the hotline kiosk was, where compliance glass doors opened for staff meetings. Each supervising official left with a packet titled The Dorsey Doctrine, a case study in values-based leadership. Victor reviewed them and laughed softly. Values-based. He thought of mops and documents, envelopes and threats, and of the city that believed in him. He was reminded of the oldest lesson he'd learned as a janitor. What you sweep under the rug one day comes back to haunt you or to guide you, if you choose to face it. Months turned into a year. The indictments were resolved. Bennett, Harlow, Langston, and Whitaker faced trials, each convicted or settled. Orion paid fines and reparations, but avoided collapse through transparent restitution. The community forgave. The company rebounded with a reputation rebuilt on trust. Employees stayed. New talent arrived, drawn by the reforms. On the anniversary of Victor's first step into the boardroom, Rose invited him and Zoe to a small gathering in that same lobby. Employees sang, the city mayor spoke, and Zoe placed flowers by the plaque. Rose handed Victor a small, polished gift box. Inside was a key, a symbolic key to the ethics office engraved with his name. He choked up at the gesture. Rose said, "It's a symbol, but we all know you held the real key to us, to our future." Everything wasn't perfect. Victor still received anonymous threats occasionally. Press scrutiny waxed and waned, but the foundations were stronger. And in the quiet moments, like now, in his home with Zoe tucked in sleep, or walking down the hallway with people greeting him by name, he understood that the real change wasn't announced with fanfare. It was buried in the small acts, the checks, the training, the listening, the courage to stand up and stay standing. He closed his eyes and pictured the future. Classrooms, boardrooms, communities underpinned by people who knew that even a single voice could reshape a company, or a city, or a life. He pictured Zoe, growing up believing that speaking truth mattered, and he whispered into the night, "We are the change, and it lasts." Under the weight of Jose's journey and the glow of Orion's lobby lights, one truth remained. When someone dares to speak, when systems choose to listen, a foundation is laid. Not just for a company, not just for a person, but for generations to come. The story of Victor Dorsey teaches us that courage doesn't always roar it, sometimes whispers from the corners of silence. One man's moral compass, grounded in integrity and love for his daughter, exposed systemic corruption and transformed a corporate empire. It reminds us that titles do not define influence, action does. True justice is often born not in courtrooms, but in janitor closets, whispered through risk, and amplified by resilience. This story calls on every listener, especially those over 45 who have seen the world change, to believe that it's never too late to stand up, speak truth, and restore honor in places where it's been lost. Justice doesn't need permission, it needs conviction.